What would you say is the dominant narrative before we get to what might be our shared kind of counter narrative?
Well, the dominant narrative is probably fraying, has been fraying for some time, but it is something like, we're in a world of generally fast scientific and technological progress. Things are getting better all the time. There's some imbalances that maybe need to be smoothed out. There's some corner case problems. Maybe there's some dystopian risks because the technology is so fast and so scary that it might be destructive. But it's a generally accelerationist story. And then there's some sort of micro adjustments within that one would have to make. It is there's there sort of are all sorts of ways I think it's fraying. I think 2008 was a big watershed moment, but that's still what's largely been holding together. And then there's sort of different institutions. Like you can look at the universities where it's sort of a tract thing. It's costing more every year, but it's still worth it. It's still an investment in the future. And this was probably already questionable in the 1980s, 1990s. College debt in the United States in 2000 was $300 billion. Now it's around 1.6, 1.7 trillion. And so there's a way in which the story was shaky 20 years ago, and today is much shakier. It's still sort of holding together somehow.
So in this story, in essence, the great dream is that your children will become educated, they will receive a college education, they will find careers, and in this bright and dynamic society, they can look forward to a future that is brighter than the future that previous generations look forward to.
Yes, I think people hesitate to actually articulate it quite that way because that already sounds not quite true.
Well, to your point, they've been adding epicycles for some time.
And so it's maybe it's a bright future, but it's really different from the parents. So we can't quite know. And they have all these new devices. They have an iPhone, and they can text really fast on the iPhone. We can't understand what the younger generation is doing. So maybe it's better has sort of an objective scale. Maybe it's just different and unmeasurable, but better in sort of an unmeasurable way. So there's sort of ways it's gotten modified, but that would still be very powerfully intact narrative. And then then there are sort of straightforward things we can be doing. The system's basically working, and it's basically going to continue to work. And there's a global version of this. There's a US version. There's an upper middle class US version. There are a lot of different variations on this.
So it always strikes me that one of the things that you do very well is that you're willing, and you're famously a chess player, you're willing to make certain sacrifices in order to advance a point. And in this case, I think you and I would both agree that there's certain areas that have continued to follow the growth story more than the general economy, and that you have to kind of give those stories their due before you get to see this new picture. Where do you think the future has been relatively more bright in recent years?
Well, again, I sort of date this era of relative stagnation and slow progress all the way back to the 1970s. So I think it's been close to half a century that we've been in this era of seriously slowed progress. Obviously, a very big exception to this has been the world of bits, computers, internet, mobile internet, software, and so Silicon Valley has somehow been this dramatic exception. Whereas the world of atoms has been much slower for something like 50 years. And when I was an undergraduate at Stanford in the late 1980s, almost all engineering disciplines in retrospect were really bad fields to go into. People already knew at the time you shouldn't go into nuclear engineering. Aeroastro was a bad idea, but chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, all these things were bad fields. Computer science would have been a very good field to go into, and that's been sort of an area where there's been tremendous growth. So that's sort of the signature one that I would cite. There are questions about how healthy it is at this point, even within that field. So the iPhone is now looking the same as it did 7-8 years ago. So that's the iconic invention. Not quite so sure. And so there's been sort of definitely a change in the tone even within Silicon Valley in the last 5-6 years on this. But that had been when it was very, very decoupled. The decoupling itself had some odd effects where if you have sort of a narrow cone of progress around this world of bits, then the people who are in those parts of the economy that have more to do with atoms will feel like they're being left behind. So there was something about the tech narrative that had this very didn't necessarily feel inclusive, didn't feel like everybody was getting ahead. And one of the ways I've described it is that we live in a world where we've been working on the Star Trek computer in Silicon Valley, but we don't have anything else from Star Trek. We don't have the warp drive. We don't have the transporter. We can't re-engineer matter in sort of this cornucopian world where there's no scarcity. And then how good is a society where you have a well-functioning Star Trek computer but nothing else from Star Trek?
Yeah, that's incredibly juicy. I mean, one of the ways that I attempted to encode something, which in part I got from you, was to say, of course, your iPhone is amazing. It's all that's left of your once limitless future, because it's the collision of the communications and the semiconductor revolutions that did seem to continue. And I date the sort of break in the economy to something like 1972, 73, 74. It's really quite sharp in my mind. Is it that way in yours?
Yes, it was probably, like, I'd say 1968, people still, the narrative of progress seemed intact. By 73, it was somehow over. So somewhere in that 5-year period, I've sort of had the 1969 versions. We landed on the moon in July of 1969, and Woodstock starts 3 weeks later. Maybe that's one way you can describe the cultural shift. You can describe it in terms of the oil shocks in 1973 at the back end. Probably, with the benefit of hindsight, there were things that were already framed by the late 1960s. So the environment was getting dramatically worse. You have the Graduate movie, should go into plastics. I think it was 1968 or 69, and that would have so there were sort of things where the story was fraying, but I think it was still broadly intact in 1968 and somehow seemed very off by 73.
Now, something that actually I'm scanning my memory, and I don't know that we've had this conversation, so I'm curious to hear your answer. One of the things that I found surprising is that I think I can tell a reasonably decent story about how this is a result of a scientific problem rather than the mismanagement of our future. Do you believe that if we assume that there was this early 1970s structural change in the economy, that it was largely a sort of man-made problem, which is what we seemingly implicitly always assume? Or might it be a scientific one? And let me give you the one iconic example that really kind of drives it home for me. I think quarks were discovered in 1968. And to find out that the proton and neutron are comprised of up and down quarks is an incredible change in our picture of the world. Yet it has no seeming implications for industry. And I started thinking about this question. Are we somehow fenced out of whatever technologies are to come, that we sort of exhausted one orchard of low-hanging fruit and haven't gotten to the next?
Yes. There's always, I think, one way to parse this question of scientific technological stagnation is sort of nature versus culture. Did the ideas of nature run out, or at least the useful ideas? Maybe we might make some more discoveries, but they're not useful.
Or they're easily useful.
Easily useful. So there's sort of nature. So it's a problem with nature, and then the cultural problem is that there was actually a lot to be discovered, or a lot that could be made useful, but somehow the culture gotten deranged. And I sort of go back and forth on those two explanations. I think it's very complicated. Obviously, we had I think in physics, you'd say even though, I mean, probably even fundamental discovery stopped after the mid 1970s, but certainly the translation didn't happen. Quarks don't matter for chemistry, and chemistry is what matters on a human level. I would say there was a lot that happened in biochemistry. So sort of the, not chemistry down, but sort of chemistry up, the interface between chemistry and biology. And that's where I would be inclined to say there's a lot more that could happen and has not quite happened because maybe the problems are hard, maybe, but maybe also the cultural institutions for researching them are restrictive. It's too heavily regulated in certain ways, and it's been just somewhat slower than we would have expected in the 1970s.
So maybe it's really just a constant dialogue between nature and culture.
Yes, obviously, because if nature has stopped, then the culture is going to derange. So there's a way in which culture is linked to nature, and then if the culture deranges, it also will look like nature stops. So I think these things there's probably elements of both. But I am always optimistic in the sense that I think we could have done better. I think we could do better. I think it's not necessarily the case that we can advance on all fronts in every direction, but I think there's more space on the frontier than just in this world of bits. So I think there are various dimensions on atoms where we could be advancing, and we just have chosen not to.
Why do you think it's so hard to convince people that, because both of us have had this experience where we sit down, let's say, to an interview and somebody talks about the dizzying pace of change, and both you and I see it's almost objectively true. I have this test, which is go into a room and subtract off all of the screens.
Yes.
How do you know you're not in 1973, but for issues of design? There aren't that many clues.
Yes, there are. Well, there are all sorts of things one can point to. I mean, I always point to the productivity data in economics, which aren't great, and then you get to debates and how accurately are those being measured. You have a sort of intergenerational thing where, our generation, Gen X, had a tougher time than the boomers, and the millennials seem to be having a much tougher time than, either us or the boomers had. So there seems to be this generational thing. So there are some of these sort of macroeconomic variables that seem pretty off. The direct scientific questions, I think, are very hard to get a handle on. And the reason for this is that in late modernity, which we're living in, there's simply too much knowledge for any individual human to understand all of it. And so, in this world of extreme hyper specialization, where it's narrower and narrower subsets of experts policing themselves and talking about how great they are, the string theorists talking about how great string theory is, the cancer researchers talking about how they're just about to cure cancer, the quantum computer researchers are just about to build a quantum computer that'll be a massive breakthrough. And then if you're to say that all these fields, not much is happening, people just don't have the authority for it. This is somehow a very different feel for science or knowledge than you would have had in 1800 or even in 1900. In 1800, Goethe could still understand just about everything.
Right.
1900, Hilbert could still understand just about all of mathematics. And so this sort of specialization, I think, has made it a much harder question to get a handle on. The political cut I have on the specialization is always that if you analyze the politics of science, the specialization should make you suspicious. Because if it's gotten harder to evaluate what's going on, then it's presumably gotten easier for people to lie and to exaggerate, and then one should be a little bit suspicious. And that's sort of my starting